What do you think our role should be as Mexicans in the United States? Many of us citizens of the United States as well as citizens of Mexico. I mean, if given the possibility of renegotiating or reviewing NAFTA, what our role would be, not as money senders to Mexico, you know, as the fifth city with more Mexicans in the world, what our role would be.
Good evening, buenas noches. As you probably know, this is the second in a series of lectures on Mexico and NAFTA organized by the CATS Center for Mexican Studies, and in this case co-sponsored by International House. Tonight we are honored to welcome back Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, an old friend of this university, and most recently Tinker visiting professor in history in the spring of 2003. A politician with a long and distinguished career, he is the founder of Mexico's Party of the Democratic Revolution. He has run for president of Mexico in the past 3 elections, and as many of you probably know, is currently seeking his party's nomination for the 2006 election. After his remarks, our guest has kindly agreed to take questions from the audience, and I will say something about the order of that after he concludes. So without further ado, because he really does need no introduction, especially at the University of Chicago, please join me in welcoming Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, who will speak on NAFTA and Mexico 10 years later.
Muchas gracias, Emilio. Dear friends, I want to thank the University of Chicago for inviting me to participate in this series of talks on the 10 years of NAFTA. It honors me to be here at this university before you. I shall give you my vision on the effects of NAFTA on Mexico's economy and social conditions, and the perspectives my country faces in regard to the current integration processes we are living. Since the beginning of the 90s, Mexico began to participate in the economic integration processes in the north of our continent after joining GATT and after the country began its commercial opening with no reciprocities a few years before. It was in those years, 1990-1991, when the negotiations of a free trade agreement with the United States, part of the initiative of the Enterprise of the Americas, promoted by President Bush Sr., became public. While the negotiations between Mexico and the United States were on course, Canada joined them. The negotiations concluded, and the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, became in force on January 1st, 1994. The initiative of the Enterprise of the Americas, we must recall, proposed to create a free trade zone comprising the whole of our continent through bilateral agreements between the United States and each of the countries in the region, according to the timing and convenience of the United States. The first agreement was signed with Canada, followed by the North American Free Trade Agreement, our NAFTA. Since NAFTA was being negotiated, a partial, defective, and hasty negotiation by the Mexican part was clearly perceived. For Mexican negotiators, we decided to reach an agreement, no matter what quality of an agreement, before the July elections and before the new administration took office on December the 1st. Thus, NAFTA left wide sectors of Mexican agriculture, industry, and services unprotected in face of their foreign competitors, and Mexican economy became more rigidly subordinated to the US economy. Since then, I proposed, for the first time before the British Columbia Federation of Labor in Vancouver, that instead of only a free trade agreement and only between the 3 countries of North America, a continental agreement on trade and development should be subscribed, in which several mechanisms for real integration and cooperation could be contemplated, like investment funds oriented to reduce or eliminate existing asymmetries between the different economies, so an equitable trade basis for a fair competitiveness could be created, a social charter, so labor conditions would tend to become similar in every country, and an environmental agreement which only arrived forcibly and not as complete as necessary as a complement to NAFTA through the so-called parallel agreements. 10 years of experience show that transforming NAFTA into a continental development agreement is still a desirable alternative, which would open real possibilities of social enhancement and economic growth, as well as equitable conditions for the multiple and always increasing exchanges between the different countries of our continent. 10 years after NAFTA became in force, results have been good in Mexico in certain areas, bad or very bad in others. In this decade, for example, trilateral trade has more than doubled. It has increased 117%, and Mexican exports have more than tripled during this period, going from $52 billion in 1993 to 165 in 2003, which may be seen as a positive impact of NAFTA, but most of those exports correspond to foreign-owned maquiladoras established in Mexico and to internal trade of transnational corporations. It is easier to correctly appreciate Mexico's situation if we consider that in 1983, of every export dollar, 88 cents corresponded to national inputs, labor, services, raw materials, parts, components. In 1994, this figure fell to 42 cents, and today it may not reach 25. The economy has become disarticulate, erratic, unstable, and slow, writes David Márquez Ayala, a renowned Mexican economist, subordinated to external forces out of its control and to the corporate invasion, and the corporate invasion has been overwhelming, as well as foreign control of the basic productive plant. Foreign trade shows certainly an impressive quantitative growth, being an statistic reality, and at the same time an economic fallacy, because it's not really our trade, but an economy functioning more and more as a maquilador center, way station, or platform for internal trade of international corporations which carry on for themselves most of transactions. End of the quote. NAFTA, which practically erased every limitation to investment, provoked a productive denationalization, probably the gravest effect of an indiscriminate opening, which started a little before and accelerated after NAFTA became in force. With NAFTA, writes the same Márquez Ayala, the government gave the rank of international commitments to three enormous absurdities: a complete opening to transnational capital, which would lead to displacement or sale of thousands of Mexican enterprises; deregulation in a high scale, which literally delivered the country to corporate oligopolies, giving carte blanche to speculative capital; and by accepting the clause of national treatment to foreign capital, the government is prevented to implement any policy or measure in favor of Mexican enterprises over foreign, like government purchases, contracts, or concessions. Even more, these measures were not limited to NAFTA's partners, but were extended, as new agreements were signed, to every possible country. It seems the government was urged to make changes irreversible to leave the country unarmed. End of the quote. In 2000, Mexican exports reached their historical maximum, $166 billion. In 2003, they showed a small 0.7% decrease, but excluding oil, this figure goes to a 2.2% decrease, and if maquiladora exports are not considered, we find Mexican exports reduced 17% between 2000 and 2003. On the other hand, between 1994 and 2003, Mexican exports increased annually 11.9%, less than in the decade previous to NAFTA enforcement, when the increase reached 15.1%. Seen from the other side of the border, Mexican imports in the United States between 1994 and 2003 grew annually 12%. From 1994 to 2000, the yearly increase rate was 18.2%, drastically falling during the last 3 years of the decade, 2000-2003, to 0.3%, and if oil is excluded, the rate becomes minus 0.7%, that is negative, which means that even if there exists a tariff preference as NAFTA partners and Mexico shares a 2,000-mile border with the United States, Mexico is losing its U.S. markets. The value of exports reduced between 2000 and 2003 in important sectors of the Mexican economy, like automobiles, falling from $15.7 billion in 2000 to $11.8 in 2003. Clothes and cotton products from 5.4 to 4.6. Television and video equipment from 7.6 to 7.0. Computer accessories and parts from 6.2 to 3.6. The loss of dynamism of Mexican economy may be observed comparing the exports annual growth rates during the periods 1994-2000 and 2000-2003, when this rate fell from 23.7 to 7.7 for measurement instruments, photographic equipment from 25 to 9, metal manufacturers from 30 to 0.4, other automobile complete or assembled from 39 to 12, furniture and household goods from 19 to 0.2, to illustrate with some examples. Direct foreign investment increased from a yearly average rate of $1.9 billion during the period 1984-1993 to $7 billion between 1994 and 2002. This increase corresponds mainly to U.S. investments. Investments from other countries kept stable, $35 billion from 1984 to 1993 and $35.4 billion from 1994 to 2002. These figures reinforce the idea NAFTA didn't make Mexico attractive to foreign investors from outside the area who preferred China, India, Brazil, or Australia for their new ventures. During these last years, U.S. demand and investment have lost their capacity to stimulate Mexican economy, which has not been successful in competing with exporters from China, India, Japan, or from the recent member states of the European Union, like the Czech Republic, Malta, Slovenia, Slovakia, or Estonia. In agriculture, opening seriously affected cereal, bean, vegetable oils, sugar, milk, and cattle producers, even if it must be recognized vegetables, cement, beer, tequila, and fruits like mango, avocado, guava, lemon, and blackberry, among others, have gained new markets. Undoubtedly, basic grains, that's corn, beans, and wheat, producers have been the most affected. Imports of these grains during the 85-93 period reached 29 million metric tons. After NAFTA became in force, these imports raised to 63.3 million tons, an increase of 123% in the period 94-2002. Making the same comparison, imports of oil seeds increased 155%, and of sorghum and other animal foods 67%. NAFTA is the only free trade agreement that liberalized the trade of agricultural products. Mexico has subscribed more than 10 agreements since 1994, and in none of them is considered the liberalization of this kind of products. The most serious social effects of trade opening is growing poverty and the enormous increase of migration towards the United States. At least 3 million migrants have crossed the border in the last decade to work, and most of them to establish permanently in the United States. Population of Mexican origin in the U.S. reaches already between 25 and 27 million, who are sending around $15 billion annually to Mexico, a fact received with joy by the government, which refuses to recognize it as one of the most indicative and worrisome of Mexico's social situation, as it shows incapacity and lack of will by the government to solve in Mexico the life problems of millions of Mexicans. But not everything negative must be attributed to NAFTA. Much of it is a consequence of what should and could be done in Mexico, mainly by the government, and was not done. For example, during the years NAFTA was being negotiated, a consistent effort to modernize or reorient the country's productive structures would have been essential to create competitive conditions for Mexican producers, considering the foreseeable effects of opening the country to foreign trade. Agriculture was simply abandoned, as happened to small and medium enterprise, provoking an accelerated rise of unemployment and migration. Infrastructure investment and the possibility of credit were drastically reduced. Development banks disappeared, or those that were left reduced their operations to a minimum. Technical assistance services were eliminated. Land tenure legislation was reformed, forcing thousands of small landholders to abandon or sell their lands, instead of increasing investments, offering credit, strengthening technical assistance, organizing producers, and stimulating the integration of productive chains. We now face the need of revising NAFTA according to the terms established in the agreement itself and to Mexican legislation, particularly Chapter 4, Article 29 of the Foreign Trade Law, in those areas or in regard to those products in which there exists damage or risk of damage to national production, which can be clearly demonstrated considering the fall of agricultural product, the thousands of bankruptcies of industrial and service businesses, the decrease in the population's income, the abandoned fields, and the increasing migration to the north. Considering NAFTA is exhausted and gave what it could give, the Mexican government should propose its two NAFTA partners the signature of a trilateral cooperation addendum to NAFTA, which would commit the three parties in a cooperation effort not only in trade, but also in social areas, production, infrastructure, having as main goals the elimination of social differences and economic asymmetries, as well as the creation of mechanisms like special funds for development, following the European example, to give reality to these new policies. There's a new threat over Mexico and Latin America, the Free Trade Area of the Americas project, proposed by President Bush, now the junior, which, as it's planned, would only make Latin American economies' subordination to the U.S. economy much more rigid and would consolidate in the long term maquila with a low technological content as the industrialization pattern in the southern countries, condemning them for a long, long time to be sources of cheap labor, both internally and for the northern economies, and to ever precarious living standards for the population. The Free Trade Area of the Americas is not the first attempt of the United States to formalize the acceptance of its continental domination. Back in 1883, the United States government proposed a free trade agreement to the Mexican government, and in the 1890 Washington Pan American Conference, the U.S. government made the proposal of a continental free trade agreement, trying then to introduce what was called the arbitration clause, equivalent to the democratic clause of the Enterprise of the Americas Initiative, that is, the authorization to the United States to intervene in domestic affairs of the Latin American countries. We must be aware, considering the difficulties to implement and put into practice the Free Trade Area Agreement as other projects underway are moving opposite to its aims, Mercosur, the Andean Pact, or the Latin American Economic System, the United States government is trying to freeze or erode these projects by promoting regional economic projects like the Puebla-Panama Plan and the Regional Andean Initiative, which propose, with the Enterprise of the Americas vision, to homologate the existing trade agreements to facilitate the administration of the agreements, which would mean to standardize Latin American economies to the lowest, to condemn the region to an endemic poverty, and to cancel political integration projects conceived on an egalitarian basis. On the other hand, with the same aims, the United States government supports military projects like the Colombia Plan. The main conditions Latin American countries have to meet to assure progress in the long term is to integrate politically and economically and diversify their trade, but not as these processes are conceived and promoted by the dominating interests in politics and finance in the United States. Latin America and the Caribbean countries must promote their political and economic integration as the Latin American and Caribbean community, expanding the recently created South American Community of Nations, and establish a fair cooperation relationship with the countries in the north that is the United States and Canada, and in general with the rest of the world. Latin America must profit from these experiences globalization offers. The countries or blocks of countries which have benefited from these processes have not received the negative effects underdeveloped countries have are those with vigorous markets as the result of having a large population with a high consumption capacity, a vast territory, a solid, integrated, and diversified productive structure, those generating knowledge and technological progress as the United States, the European Union, China, which is following their path, Russia, Japan, and the Southeastern Asian countries, which at the same time generate and participate in globalization processes and benefit from their positive effects. Practice, if not an ideal, at least a much more consistent social and economic internal policy, which open the opportunity for them to have solid and expanding internal markets and dispose of sufficient resources to meet social and development needs. During the 10 years NAFTA has been in force, Mexico observes important social and political changes, showing progress in some cases and moving backwards in others. On January 1st, 1994, precisely the day NAFTA became in force, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation upheaval broke. At the end of that same year, a few days after the new government had taken office, the economy collapsed. In 1995, Mexican economy decreased by 7% of the gross domestic product. Discredit of the new administration and growing political and social instability led the government to try to diminish pressures by liberalizing the political system. In 1996, electoral authority was granted autonomy, and the possibility opened to elect the next year, for the first time in Mexican history, the governor of the federal district, that is, the chief of government of mayor of Mexico City. With the outcome of the 1997 federal election, for the first time too, the official party, the PRI, besides losing the government of the federal district, lost its absolute majority in the Chamber of Deputies, our lower chamber. Today, no party has absolute majority in any of both chambers, deputies and senators. In 2000, political alternation arrived, the PRI losing the presidency and in its hands since 1946. With alternation, the party of state regime ended, representing a significant political progress. Majority vote in July 2000 had the aim of ousting the PRI from power, but carried with it many more hopes: new job opportunities, higher family incomes, a better education and better health care, a growing economy, an effective combat against poverty, security, a firm combat against corruption and delinquency. 4 years of the alternation government have passed, and even if the party of state regime was ousted, and recognizing we now have an enhanced electoral democracy, results fall on the side of debit, that is, of needs, insufficiencies, and incapacities, and not on the side of credit. The government recognizes the number of Mexicans under the poverty line has increased, reaching today 2/3 of total population. During the 4 years of the present administration, according to official data, over 400,000 formal jobs have been lost, and there has been no capacity to create 1.3 million jobs demanded annually, accumulating a 4 million deficit, which must add to the previous unsatisfied demand, someplace around 50% of our total labor force. Purchasing power of wages has fallen at least 20% in the same period, and the economy has been stagnant since 2001. Since neoliberal policies were imposed over 2 decades ago, and Mexico has applied them with rigorous orthodoxy, voices from the government have been saying there is no other alternative for the country to find a way to solve its problems, that any other policy not keeping strictly to the Washington consensus would provoke major economic imbalances accompanied by social and political disturbances, even if, as is beginning to be widely recognized, it is neoliberal policies which incubate those possible disturbances by concentrating wealth in the very few, keeping the economy stagnant, increasing economic and social asymmetries within the country and internationally, generating unemployment and expanding poverty. The first unavoidable step to consistently advance in the solution of the nation's problems is to recover the capacity to make sovereign decisions and to implement public policies according to the country's and the majority of the population's interests. During the last years, neoliberal models are being discarded in different countries, and it's generally recognized developed nations never apply them rigorously. Strong nations protect their producers and pay attention, at the same time, to social problems and to stimulate economic growth. They try to avoid conflicts. It's time then, underdeveloped countries follow the same path, change the development patterns, and propose the creation of a new world order without hegemonies, just and equitable, which favors solidary cooperation and guarantees peace and progress. Internally in Mexico, it's necessary to fulfill the San Andrés agreements subscribed in 1996 by the Zapatista army and the government, which disavowed the signatures of its representatives, did not keep to the agreements, and left latent a state of war officially recognized. It's necessary to deepen reforms and modernize the state by democratizing the executive and the exercise of power, to develop an equitable federalism, a judicial reform which guarantees a fair and effective justice, a system of real protection of human and social rights, so these may be fully respected and exercised with no limitation. A new policy of economic growth is required, stimulating productive investment, implementing a fiscal reform which renders resources enough demanded by development, reorienting oil policy to industrialize the resource within the country and directed by public interest, giving priority to job creation, the best way to have a fair distribution of wealth, incorporating scientific and technological progress to the productive structures, and enhancing the quality of education. Mexico claims for the modern and strong state, sustained by legitimacy and moral authority, stemmed from obeying and enforcing the law, by the efficiency of the services it's obliged to provide, and by opening effective opportunities of progress for society. Mexico is demanding changes in its economic model and to reorient its public policies according to the nation's and the people's interests. These changes will be possible if a political majority is created to make them democratically viable and to carry them on. It's not an easy task. In the present conditions, the majority can only be formed if it has a solid support in a political and programmatic platform capable of convoking an ample plurality which sums and transcends political parties and social organizations and incorporates to political action significant sectors of society. After this period of stagnation and sterile confrontation, the country is demanding a firm political conduction with course and initiative. It's also claiming for prudence and serenity to conciliate positions, overcome obstacles, and progress socially and economically, as well as politically and in culture, keeping to principles and respecting the people's democratic mandate. This is how I visualize Mexico, and after 10 years of NAFTA enforcement, and as the country goes deeper into the 21st century, struggling for its sovereignty, opening the way to a participative democracy, and to really become a generous country with its people. Thank you.
Thank you. We have some time for questions now. We have a microphone up here in the front, and you can line up in front of it if you wish to make your questions. I will only make one request, and that is that you state your questions briefly, and that you limit yourself, if possible, only to questions and not to statements, to give as many members of the public an opportunity to answer their questions. We can start with the microphone over here, if anybody would like to ask any questions.
Good evening. I'm interested to hear more specific, because what you have been doing today is practically a very broad critique about the neoliberal policy today in practically around the world. My concern is that on the one side, when I was sitting down there, I was thinking, wait, what is he talking about? He's attacking the new opening of the liberal economies. On the other side, we are talking about protecting our economy. So are you talking about in the middle, protection against in the economy that probably from my point of view, they don't have a room of maneuver. Protectionist economy practically in a global condition, they are really poor achievement. So I like to really understand, because it's the speech that you have appear in some way the populist one again, and I'm concerned about that because in Latin America I have not been hear from you what is the coalition in order to have a really reorganization of the forces of Latin America in order to face United States predominant in the economy of the international market. So I really like to hear more about that.
Well, I'm not attacking the opening of the economy, the opening of Mexico to foreign trade, but I think that the way it was done was not the best for the country and for stimulating Mexican economy and stimulating the increase of production and the diversification of production. Mexico didn't profit, didn't use the several years when NAFTA was being negotiated to modernize its economy and to compete in much better conditions when the economy was going to be open. So this is what I really criticize, that we didn't do what we had to do. That has nothing to do specifically with the negotiations of NAFTA, but what was not done during the time of negotiations and what hasn't been done during the 10 years of NAFTA being in force. Mexico has not made an important effort to integrate its productive chains. It hasn't made no effort to integrate maquila to the Mexican economy. That would have created jobs in Mexico, that would have stimulated regional economies. And I'm not thinking of protectionism in the old way, or keeping Mexico from participating in different integration processes. On the contrary, I think we must participate much more actively, but trying to profit of the advantages we can get from this participation in NAFTA. I think we must do an effort, and Mexico should be a very active promoter of integration with the Latin American and the Caribbean countries. So we could also form a large population and economic bloc that would be in a much better condition to compete and to cooperate with the large economic and population blocks like the United States or the European Union or China. That's what we think should be done, and this doesn't mean that we must go back to what protectionism was in the 60s or 70s. On the contrary, we must participate in this new integration processes we are living, but not disregarding Mexico's social conditions, and not keeping Mexico from facing and trying to give solution to the different problems we are living. That's what that's what I've been proposing, and that's what I think I said in this a few moments ago.
You can come up to the front.
It was really an interesting presentation that you did today. Me, nothing an economist, sometimes it was a little bit hard for me to understand. However, my family's from Morelia, Michoacan, and we go every year, or every 2-3 years, and what I do understand is when I see in downtown, in the beautiful colonial district, I see a Burger King set up, so disturbing. I was there the year the Burger King came there, then I see McDonald's. I go to Blockbuster, and I see there's a little section called the Mexican section, and they're talking, So I mean, I see the effects of what you're talking about, what I would call, imperialism in Mexico, and I agree with everything you said. The question is, how
mobilizations, there were important demonstrations in different parts of the country, but we couldn't revert the fraud, and we had no capacity of doing it. So we decided to organize a political force. That's how the PRD was created. We had to work more time. We had to make an effort that is taking more time than we would have liked, and that's what we've been doing, working politically to trying to implement a different project in Mexico. But in '88, well, there were big demonstrations. We used every resource the law offered us, but we couldn't revert the fraud. And that's what I can say. Nobody was prepared for an armed movement. Nobody was prepared for a revolution. That's not just a voluntaristic decision. A revolution is prepared, and nobody thought of using any means that were not constitutional. So we decided to create a political force, and this is the PRD, and this is how we've been working in Mexico, trying to change things, doing it politically and not through any other means.
After losing the election in '88, you say that you reorganized the left and that loose coalition that you had into the PRD. And in '94, what was probably a much more transparent election, Cedillo prevailed. And then in 2000 again, the Mexican people chose to go to the right as opposed to keeping the PRI in power anymore. How do you plan in 2006 to talk to the Mexican people in a different way that will see you or whoever comes out of the left as the most reasonable, exciting, and viable option for change in Mexico? I was very glad and happy to see that you're running again in 2006. But thinking about the past two elections in particular, how do you think that you should approach this one differently?
Well, the country's conditions are different. The situation of the country is different. We're trying to make a proposal that may be seen as viable by a majority in Mexico, a proposal that becomes attractive, a proposal that in which people consider they can participate in its implementation. On the other hand, we think that this proposal will show the different coincidences with different sectors of the population, not only within the party or not only members of the PRD or other parties who could join a coalition, but trying to make explicit the coincidences with other sectors of society. That's with people from enterprise, from business, with organized workers, with peasants, with women. That is how I think we can build a new majority, a political majority for 2006, and mainly organized or convoked through a proposal that may seem viable to many people of implementing in the next 6 years, from 2006 to 2012. That's the way.
I have a related question. I was fortunate to be in Mexico in July of 2000 and to witness the euphoria of the people after the election when PRI was ousted. And thinking about the subsequent gains of the PRI in local elections, and about a lot of the backlash that seems to be developing against Fox and the PAN, is this an opportunity? Do you think there will be a significant swing to the left? Do you think that the 2000 election really sort of busted open the door in terms of realistic options for democracy, or, it's criminal for me to even suggest this, but is this sort of, do you think it's more likely that there will be a return to the pre in terms of at least having a government that's productive, if not necessarily democratic?
Well, I think the 2006 election will be a very important test to our electoral democracy, to our electoral system. I expect we have a fair election. I expect we have a transparent and clean election in 2006, and this will prove that we have a much better electoral system. I wouldn't expect to repeat the experiences of 1988 or any other of an electoral fraud or an electoral or a government manipulation of the elections. On the other hand, well, I think we have to consider that the PRI is still a powerful apparatus. The PRI is an existing, a real political force. It has the government of 2/3 of the states in Mexico. And, well, there is the risk, I would say, of the PRI going back to government. That depends on the capacity other forces, and particularly democratic and progressive forces, have to convince people that the most convenient government, the most convenient proposal is that of the progressive forces in Mexico. But well, that's what we have to work on, and I'm optimistic that we may really turn the vote to a progressive position, but well, we'll have to see what happens on July 2006.
You spoke of the importance of economic integration among the countries that make up the Latin Caribbean community, and I was wondering now, with the experience that you've had with the 10 years of seeing the implications of NAFTA, what advice you could offer to countries that are currently negotiating with the United States and their own free trade agreements instead of ALCA. What advice you could offer them in countries like Colombia and Peru and Ecuador that are currently trying to negotiate these agreements that have serious consequences for their populations?
Well, I think that what I should say is that these countries, as Mexico should have done, must try to reduce the differences they have in their economies regarding the economy of the United States. And that cannot be done only by signing a free trade agreement. If there are not other mechanisms like those used in Europe to integrate countries with a lower relative development like Greece, Portugal, or Spain, where there were investments from the more developed countries directed to these other countries so they could participate in a much more equitable condition in this integration process. I think the experience we have in NAFTA shows that only free trade doesn't really improve economic conditions if there are not internal national measures taken specifically to modernize productive structures and to make the country, the national producers competitive in regard to foreign producers. And this, I think, in Latin America cannot be done if there are not mechanisms like this, investment funds like those used in Europe, to reduce the difference, to reduce the asymmetries between the largest economies and those with less development. I think this is what I could say regarding the agreements that are being negotiated, or the new agreements that that will be subscribed in these recent times.
Hello. If the 2000 election seemed like a celebration of democracy, it seems like the following elections in Mexico have been a very slow funeral, disenchantment from the voters, low voter turnout, political infighting between the parties, the PRD, the scandal with Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Do you think do you propose any reforms for the political parties themselves or the party system in Mexico to reduce their own infighting, and that the deputies actually work for the good of the country and not necessarily for the good of the party? What would you propose? Would you propose something like Jorge Castañeda, who calls himself the citizen candidate, or something different?
Well, I think you have to deal with realities, and you cannot just change things as any of us would like. I think that we'll have to continue working and having a Congress that will not have an absolute majority, that this demands capacity and will to negotiate, to bring different positions closer, where you can reconcile positions, where you can find coincidences. But no, I think well, I would like that my party in particular would be in a better condition, that we wouldn't have internal confrontations, that the party would be working on its to improve its organization, to incorporate new members, etc. But well, that's what I would like my party to be doing. But I think we have to face reality. The party is not doing that. I think we are facing a difficult situation regarding what the PRD. I don't see the other parties doing other things very different. But no, I won't be thinking that the solution to Mexico's problems is a candidate like Jorge Castañeda. If I thought that, well, I would be supporting him.
Two brief questions. First of all, how do you see education in the role of education, higher education in this? Because it seems like UNAM, I have friends who went there, and it's really corrupted, and there's a lot of problems with that public education. And how do you see places like Tec de Monterrey, being renowned and being a private elitist institution, keeping the knowledge, cocoon in certain spots in Mexican progress? But how do you see the role of education in advancing Mexico and its economy? Because it seems like it's falling apart. And my other brief question is, how do you see China? I read some articles about China going to Cuba and going to certain countries in South America, trying to make agreements. I know Mexico is not too happy with China. It's more like an economic rival. How do you see the role of China in the future competing with Mexico and Latin America?
Well, I'm convinced that we have to, in the case of Mexico, we have to improve the quality of education in every grade, from the lowest to the highest. I wouldn't agree with you that UNAM is a corrupted institution. I would not agree with you. I think it's an institution of excellence in many of its activities. I'm convinced that education must be seen as part of the effort to open to social justice in the case of Mexico, and at the same time as a very important support of economic development and economic growth. I think it plays both roles. And I see China as, I think we are all seeing China very aggressive in gaining new markets, in obtaining new technology, in increasing its economic opportunities. And well, I think that China is a new power, and we must understand that it's a new power, and it's always difficult to compete with nations that, as China, have been making a very, very important, consistent effort of economic development and of social improvement. So I think we should, in many ways, try to do what they are doing, try to incorporate technology and scientific progress to our productive apparatus, that we should improve education, open the possibility of a much higher quality education in every level in Mexico, and that's what we should be doing, and not only seeing China as a competitor. Maybe there's something to learn of them, of what they're doing right now.
We wanted to welcome you to the university and also note the fact that your arrival here brings a lot of people from the Mexican community into the university. So my question is, how do you view now the role of the Mexican community, Mexican immigrant community in the United States with respect to developments in Mexico? We know that when you were here in the late 1980s, the enormous reception that you received here in Chicago alerted politicians of other political parties in Mexico that they ought to be paying attention to Mexicans outside Mexico. And that is only accelerated. We know recently Consul Sada tells us that 9 Mexican governors all came here together a couple of months ago to visit their constituents. So how do you see the role of the community here, politically, economically, socially, in influencing what's happening back home?
Well, I see the Mexican community here in Chicago, in the Chicago area, very, very active. I know of very successful people of this community. I know they are they help very much Mexicans that come to this area. They open opportunities for them, and that there's a very important contribution of Mexicans, not only in this area, but as you well know, a very important contribution of Mexicans working in the United States, particularly through the remittances they send to their families, to Mexico's development. So I see a very active community, maybe much more active than Mexican communities in other parts of the United States. And, well, that's what I find here in Chicago.
Hi. You mentioned the protection going on in developed countries. I'm reminded especially of the agricultural protection we have here in the United States that's hurt the Mexican economy. And that's recently been challenged in the WTO, notably by Brazil. And I was wondering what, aside from trying to get a more integrated Latin American economy to challenge U.S. dominance, I was wondering if there was any moves that either the Mexican government is making now or that your proposal would make to challenge this type of protection, the agricultural protection in the United States that's hurt so many poorer countries.
Well, as you know, agriculture here is one of the more subsidized sectors, and well, that makes it very difficult to compete with this agriculture. As you well know, too, in Europe, all the agreements in the European Union, all the agreements on agriculture are those that have taken the longest time to be definite. In many cases, they still are negotiating their in regard to agricultural products. So, what I think we should establish is that there's damage to Mexican production and to Mexican economy by the way Mexico opened its trade, and especially on basic grains, that's corn, wheat, and beans, and that in this at least in this particular regarding these particular products, NAFTA should be revised. So we could at least give time to modernize the culture of these products, and we could offer better conditions to those producers that are working particularly on this products, basic grains.
Bienvenido, Gobernador. Now I'm going to English. Basically, I would love to speak Spanish, but I know that there are a lot of more prominence in English here. But I'd like to transfer ourselves to the year 2006. You have just awakened in the morning and found out you are the President of Mexico. And I certainly will vote for you. And you find yourself with a very special invitation from President Bush. I, as a Mexicana, first of all, and a citizen of this country, am very appalled and very upset over the undocumented issue and the immigration laws and the terrorism and all the drama that President Bush has caused with all his lies. So I look to you as someone who might add that difference that President Fox has not been able to do. And I want to see it open. I want to see blood, you know? That's me, because I see so much indifference, and I see like, let's relax, Bush will come out, Bush will come around, we'll get the liberals, we'll get the Democrats, and we'll see no action. But along comes Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas. What does he have to say about the issue of the undocumented worker, the issues that pertain to them and to the immigration and to this thing called terrorism? How do you answer to Bush, and how can we change this? Because after all, we know that the terrorists are not our people. We know that this country survives on the working, and the working is the Mexicano, the Latinoamericano. That's how this country survives. And we need you, along with our support here in this country, to give a different solution or even a better solution. Thank you.
Well, I think the Mexican government has to be very insistent in the recognition by the U.S. government and the U.S. society of the contribution Mexicans and in general migrants give to the progress of this country. If we get to make this conscious in this country, that Mexicans and many other migrants here are really contributing to the progress of this country, regardless if they have documents or they have no documents, if their migratory situation is regular or not. If we can really make this country conscious of this contribution, well, many things will change. I think it's not confrontation, but trying to convince, trying to explain, trying to reason with authorities and with different sectors and people who make opinion here in the United States of the importance and of this contribution, because people work here, they contribute to the progress of this country, they are paying taxes, they're in legal and positive actions and activities. Well, if we really can make this country conscious of the importance and the value of this contribution, well, I think that things will start to change. I don't think that the way to improve the condition of migrants in this country is through confrontation. I think it's more the use of reason, the use of solid arguments, the effort that the Mexican government has to do with different sectors, not only with the government, but of different sectors of society, with business people, with universities, with society in general, but not through confrontation, but mainly through reason. And that's an effort that will take a long time. I don't see that this will change, that things may change in a short term. It will take time, but I think that's the way to deal with this problem of Mexicans and in general migrants here in the United States.
Ingeniero, Well, Susan stole a little bit of my question. I also wanted to ask you for the role of Mexicans, but let me put it this way. Back in 1983, when we were here, only about 400,000 Mexicans or so, we lobbied so hard and worked so hard against NAFTA that we even pushed our congressmen, only Latino congressmen in the Midwest, Luis Gutierrez, to vote in Congress against NAFTA. Now today we are about 1.5 million just here in Chicago and surrounding cities. And, or at least we were, 5 years ago in the census, it's been said that Chicago is the 5th largest city, or the city with more Mexicans in the world. We are dealing with Puebla in that sense, we're bringing more people here. Now, given that we are almost the triple than we were 11 years ago, given the possibility, at least, of voting in the year 2000 as Mexicans abroad for president, which I think it would strengthen and be a cohesive element for the Latino Mexican community here. What do you think our role should be as Mexicans in the United States? Many of us citizens of the United States as well as citizens of Mexico. I mean, if given the possibility of renegotiating or reviewing NAFTA, what our role would be. Not as money senders to Mexico, as the 5th city with more Mexicans in the world, what our role would be. And in that sense, talking about our strength, if you were to be the PRD candidate for the Mexican presidency, would you be willing to push all you could so migrant Mexicans could have diputados and senadores, even if the law doesn't say so? Thank
you. First, I think we should remember that when Cedillo took office in 1994, one of his offers was to give way to the initiatives that would allow Mexicans, Mexican citizens being out of Mexico, to vote in the 2000 federal election. This initiative was finally opposed by the group in Congress, and in the, I don't remember exactly if it was 2001 or 2002, but the same initiative was presented in Congress now during the Fox administration, and now it was blocked by the PAN group in Congress. I would expect that this commitment of the Mexican government, institutional commitment, I would say, could be finally approved, this initiative, in this next legislative period of this year. And maybe if things are worked hard and very consciously, we could have the Mexicans being abroad voting in the next election, even if it's difficult to implement in practice the way to organize these elections, this election particularly, as you well know, here in the United States, because the number of Mexicans and the distribution of Mexicans here in the United States, they're all over the country. Maybe we were talking at the reception before this talk here, we were talking of maybe 2-3 million voting, not the 10 or 12 million who have the right to vote. But and that would be a complicated, at least, election to organize. But if this initiative could be approved, that's how to regulate, how to vote, how Mexicans could vote being abroad, maybe we could have Mexicans voting, Mexicans abroad voting in this 2006 election. I would hope that this could happen, and I think I'm sure that at least the PRD will be trying to push this initiative so it may be approved in this next legislative period that opens on February the 1st. What's the role of Mexicans here in the United States regarding NAFTA or the revision of NAFTA? Well, I would think that it should mostly center in demanding that NAFTA doesn't continue to be only a free trade agreement, or not only using the same mechanisms it has been using since 1994 up to now, but that if we really want a much better cooperation between our two countries, that an addendum should be proposed. So at least investment funds to make Mexican producers more competitive regarding Canadian and American producers could be, if that could be reached, if we could do that. That's at least create this investment funds so we could reduce the asymmetry, the existing asymmetry between American and Mexican economy, and we could open the possibility for a much better operation, a much better integration of Mexican economy, so we could have better competitive conditions regarding the collaboration or the participation of Mexico in international trade, and particularly in U.S. and Canadian markets. This, I think, could be one of the main demands of Mexicans here in the United States, to demand for an addendum of NAFTA, so at least these investment funds could be created, so these funds could go to Mexico, so we could create jobs in Mexico, so we could reduce the flow of migrants and improve the condition of migrants here, of Mexican migrants here in the United States.
These will be the last two questions.
First of all, I wanted to just appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you. From Mexico City, born and raised in La Michoacana, a small little colony or block in the inner city. And by working hard, I got to, get into a research program, be in a PhD program. And ironically, now I get to talk to Mexican leaders at this point in a university setting. So it's a great opportunity for me at this point. And I guess for my question is, I know with the free trade agreement, basically it's about investment in the country and mutual investment. Of course, the United States has a lot of resources, but Mexico, when Carlos Salinas de Gortari was here, he was talking about the opportunity of bringing more investment to Mexico. How, in your role, you were the leader once in Mexico City and dealing with all the kind of complexities of Mexico City. How do you see your role, and especially as you as possible president or future president of Mexico, how do you see the role of different variables that you work with? Crime, corruption, inequality, poverty, the decentralization. How do you see your future role in that part? And what political sacrifices would you do? If you could be specific on this part, because you've had experience ruling in Mexico City, and now as a possible future president, you'll have to deal with that in the macro kind of system. And also, how do you see the role of Mexicans like me coming abroad, studying, and coming back? And what do you see the role of us as students coming in, especially related to the socialization in Mexico, any additional value? What additional value you think people that come and bring different experience kind of bring to the plate, especially in terms of knowledge, integrity, and commitment?
what could be the sacrifices to be done to combat crime, corruption, to push decentralization? Well, I wouldn't be thinking of particularly of sacrifices. I think that a new government, a government with a different commitment, well, must combat crime, must attack corruption very vigorously, starting from the upper levels to the lower levels. It has to be a political commitment. It has to be a personal commitment. It has to be done with the conviction that it can be done, and no corruption, any kind of corruption, any size of corruption can be tolerated. And I think that's what has to be done in the particular case of Mexico. And, well, regarding other issues like decentralization, well, this is an effort that has to be done to improve regional conditions, to make our federalism much more equitable, so municipalities, the states have more resources and at the same time more capacity of decisions on different issues. What would I think is the role of Mexicans that come here to study and go back to Mexico? Well, I would expect that most of Mexicans who come here could go back to Mexico and find opportunities, and that's one of the main, most important changes I think we should be trying to reach in Mexico, that those who go to other countries to study, to get a better opportunity, well, could go back to Mexico and find in Mexico the opportunity to apply the knowledge they have acquired in their studies abroad, that they could, I think that it's an obligation of the government, one of the social responsibilities of the government, to open opportunities to those who go to study abroad, those who have acquired new knowledge, those that are best prepared, so they could really contribute to Mexico's progress. I think that's a responsibility of the Mexican government, and that should be understood by the authorities, and that should be understood by those who are in government. That's not happening right now. That's true. But I think that's one of the important changes that we must try to bring up in Mexico, so those who are now abroad don't stay out of Mexico, but could go back to Mexico and apply what they have learned in the opportunity that has opened to them, apply it in Mexico. That's what I would be thinking.
Ingeniero, hello. I want to ask about something that we see both in this country and in Mexico. As we all know, in this country, the religious right had a big influence in keeping Bush in office. I've read that in Mexico there is a group called El Yunque, which is could be compared to this, a very conservative Catholic group that has a big influence in many politicians, had been linked to Fox and to many others in power. What do you know about it? Or what could be learned about it? Like, what could progressive forces in Mexico learn about it, about them, their strategies? And also I would want to ask about your position on some more cultural or social issues of that sort, the sort that the religious right sometimes uses as a dividing force, but that refer to the oppression, for instance, of groups like or the situation of women, the situation of gays and lesbians in Mexico, or more general issues about discrimination by age or other forms? What would you do if you were president about it?
Well, what we know in Mexico is that Junque is a very radical, conservative organization. That many of the members of the present administration are members of the Junque, that they work as a corporation, that they work as a hermandad, a brotherhood, something like that. And that they protect and try to promote the people from this organization. Several members of the presidential cabinet, several important members of the PAN are said members of this Junque organization. On the other, I couldn't say more than that. Well, that's a reality, and that's part of the Mexican right, and well, we're confronting them in many aspects, and in general in our political activity. Regarding the rights of what we could call diversity, well, we are proposing to promote these rights, to make them fully respected. That's trying to gain in equality for women, trying to open the possibility of legislating regarding the rights of gays, of lesbians. I couldn't be more specific right now on exactly what we would be proposing, but we think that respect to this rights, respect to this diversity, promoting that this different groups could well have the place in society and the participation in different activities they can have and they should have, is one of the commitments of progressive forces in the case of Mexico, and particularly in the case of the PRD, which has been promoting the rights of women, the PRD has been promoting the respect and the rights of diverse groups in Mexican society. Not much more I could say on that.
Thank you. Before we formally conclude, I would like to remind you that there are other talks in this series, and I invite you to take the flyer we have left on your seats, and we hope to see you back here. Also, to ask you to fill out this information card to allow us to know more about you and to contact you for our future events. Having said that, please join me in thanking Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas for a most stimulating conversation. Muy interesante, lo voy a leer con cuidado.